Welcome to this edition of Workplace Culture Wisdom, a conversation series with experienced leaders. Hello, I'm here with Michelle Seymour Smith. She is my featured guest today for our Workplace Culture Wisdom, a series of conversations with experienced leaders. And Michelle and I have worked together in the past, and she is a strategic advisor who uses her experience and her perspective with individuals on a coaching basis. And she is also a director on a number of boards. She has a large portfolio of organizations where she offers the wisdom and experience she has gained over the years. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Kathy. Nice to see you today.
One of the things that we wanted to talk about with respect to healthy workplace culture and with respect to the experience that you have gained over the years is your perspective on what makes a company successful.
I've been asked this before with relative to one of the companies I've worked with in the past which had a great success. And I always say that I think the answer was we had the right people in the room and the right environment, and we ended up building something greater than the sum of the parts. I think there's a synergy that comes from having strong leadership and a really strong culture that supports people, that they can really see a purpose almost greater than themselves and really embrace that and kind of create things that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So I'm a big believer that culture is a key part of a winning formula.
And culture is one of these intangible things that's really hard to define. What would you say from your experience or some elements of that culture? Now, you mentioned leadership already, and you mentioned the synergy
Mhm.
and the sort of having the right people at the right time. But if there were practices that enabled that to happen, what would you say they are?
Sure. And I think it's funny because I think culture is defined by what is the tone and the
Mm,
mood of a company. So, what's the tone coming from leaders? And then, as you walk the floor, as you work in that space, as you go about your job, what is the mood? Are people excited to be there or not? I think that's how you can feel and touch a culture. Now,
yeah.
set it up. I think it does start with clear leadership. Leadership starts with respect for people. I think as a leader, the first thing you have to do is really treat everybody who has a role at the company with deep respect, recognizing there is value in what they're doing, whether that is the janitor or whether it's, the head salesperson. Like every role has a part to play, and you have to respect the value that role brings. And then when you have that, you're going to respect the person in the role. So I think that's the cornerstone. I think humility is a big part of good leadership. The ability to listen, the ability to know your job is not to have all the answers, or your job is really to have all the right questions. The people you're hiring are the ones who are meant to have the answers. So you have to give them the space to kind of have a voice in what it is they're doing. I think it has to be okay to fail. Obviously, you want to fail small, you want to fail quick, and then you want to learn from it. You don't want big, raging failures. But if you work in a culture where every time something goes wrong, it's a big issue, and people get slapped on the wrist, then people will be afraid to do anything outside the norm, and that just inhibits any kind of culture and innovation. So I think that tone at the top, and respect, and really listening to the people you've hired to work for you is the starting point of good leadership. And then I do believe in things like a mission and a value. The reason I think having a very clear mission is, what are we here to do at the end of the day? And every single person needs to know what it is we're trying to accomplish, what is my role in accomplishing it, and then what say do I have and how it's done. I think having values is really important, but more important than putting a bunch of values on the wall is leadership's job is to live those values and show them in their behavior. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what company says they value, what their slogans are. If the management is acting in a way counter to that, that is the culture and those are the values. And then I think the third thing is leaders really need to be intentional about culture. I think a lot of companies um, kind of like, oh, it'll take care of itself, or oh, we have this culture, and they put the words up and all of that, but they don't actually do practices to make sure now is the culture I'm seeing what I want it to be. Easiest way to know what is the culture is walk the floor. As leaders, you need to get out of your offices, you need to go where the work is being done, and you need to just walk the floor and talk to people and ask them questions and listen to what the answers are. Um, I find as a director, I can often tell the culture of a company just by walking into the main area of the floor. And it will tell you a lot as to what kind of energy is on the floor. How do people work together? Is it collaborative or is it siloed? Just by being in the middle of like the bullpen. Now, I will recognize a lot of people are working virtually now. So I think leaders need to be creative in terms of, okay, if I can't walk the floor, do I set up coffees with people? Do I reach out to people individually? You have to be, again, intentional about how do I connect with the employees throughout the company to really understand how they're feeling and where they're at.
I like that focus on intentionality because we say that as well. If you're not intentional about the culture that you're creating, you get what you get.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably not going to be what you're trying to get.
Right, exactly. And if you're not being intentional about the practices, like you said, then there's no way to actually get the culture
Yeah,
that you think that you want. And
right.
so this theme of intentionality around culture and the leadership role in it is one that we have been hearing. I'm curious about if so two things I'm curious about. One is about what you mentioned about employee surveys and being a bit jaded about them. And the other one is about I have some questions about working virtually and culture. But I'm curious about why people would over time just say what they think leadership wants to say in a survey.
I think people give you an opportunity if first of all, if this is a culture where you're not having these informal meetings, especially, and you're relying on an employee survey as opposed to employee survey is one piece of a broader communication plan and a way of working with your staff. I think people will give you one or two opportunities where they will really be honest and they will really voice their concerns. And then if things don't change, the energy and the effort they're putting into kind of the care and I want this company to be better is going to fade because they're like, well, I've told you several times that this is a problem and it doesn't change. So there comes a point if you keep doing the same thing and nothing's changing, something's got to give. And usually the person just says, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I say, nothing's going to change. So I'm just going to hit okay, 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 okay. You see it as well on 360 performance reviews. If you are a leader and you have 360 performance reviews, and again, people will be honest the first time, maybe the second time, someone who's really dug in, maybe a third time. But if at the end of the day, the things that people are looking for to change don't change, they will stop putting that much of themselves into that space. I do caution leaders if they're talking about employing 360s, like you need to have a plan for what's going to change concurrent with, you need to have that lined up. So when you get the feedback, this is how I'm going to work to change these behaviors.
That's great. I really appreciate that perspective, Michelle. And one of the things that we talk about, we have identified 5 key components of workplace culture. And the last one is this metrics and assessments. But when we talk about them, we talk about them as a starting place for a conversation and in an exploration. And employee engagement is another one. It's the fourth component of a healthy workplace culture that we've identified. And that's where those conversations that you're talking about really need to happen.
Yeah.
And being on the floor and asking questions is one possible employee engagement strategy that leaders can use for sure.
And to the point of employee engagement, sometimes the ask are things that you can't do, or you're putting the effort in. And communication, for example, everybody always asks for more communication, and the best advice I ever got to communicate was communicate, 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 and then communicate some more. So no matter what you do, it's never enough. And so I think sometimes it's not a matter of giving in to what people want, and just as much as acknowledging, here's the feedback we got, this is how we're prioritizing it, um, this is something we see the need for it, but at this time we're not able to address it because of XYZ. Then they've been heard. So that's what people want. They want to be heard. It's not necessarily about giving it everything they want, as much as recognizing it, valuing it, and then being transparent in how you're approaching it.
And that's the value of actually having a strategy.
Yeah, that's
And
yeah.
knowing what it is you want to engage on, and knowing how you're going to get that information back to
Yeah.
the people who work with you and for you.
Well, strategy, I think, is another part of strong leadership and strong culture. When you have a very clear priority that kind of sets out, this is what we're trying to do. So here are the 2 or 3, not 10, top priorities for the company. And then this is how we're going to execute on it. When you put that intentionality, even around your strategy and how you do business, the reality is in that thought process of, okay, this is our goal. Let's say for ease, it's a sales goal. You have to think about, okay, so how are the customers? How are we going to focus on our customers? How are our employees going to support it? How are we going to service this business? It forces you to think of all of the dimensions beyond just, I need the top line to grow. And again, employee engagement fits into that, because how are we going to get our employees focused on this? How are we going to service our customers? How are we going to, or do we have sufficient number of employees? So strategy, again, is a part, in my mind, of good leadership and strong culture. Everyone knows very clearly what the priorities are.
During COVID, a lot of companies ended up working virtually because they had to. And now there is a call from
Yeah.
a number of companies to come back to the office. And our research indicates that people are wanting more flexible work arrangements, and not necessarily 100% virtual, but certainly more hybrid. And you mentioned about when people are working virtually. So two themes around that. One is any perspective that you have on the call back to the office, and the other is which you already started to touch on, which is how we create that sense of culture and good, healthy team dynamics working from virtual spaces.
So I think if a company has to call the employees back to the office, I think that is more telling about the culture than anything else, because clearly the employees don't want to be in the office. And while it's easy to say, well, commuting could be an issue or whatever, pre-COVID people went into the office. So I think there's an issue in the culture. That's just my personal perspective. Um, I personally think there is value in a hybrid model, because as someone who doesn't work in an office anymore, I spent all of my career, working in an office, and now in this kind of consulting role I have, it's much more flexible. I actually miss the camaraderie and the brainstorming and the thought challenge you could do with other people. But I also love the flexibility that it gives me. So I think having a mixed model is going to be the way of the future. The 9 to 5 was created by the Ford Motor Company to help in the creation of automobiles back 100 years ago. So I think we can say this model is likely outdated, and what does it look like for a future? The thing that I come to mind that I feel like this is the way to go. I had done a course through Harvard Business School, and we did a case study on the Boston Consulting Group, and they were challenged with culture issues and burnout issues and all of that. And what they created was certain hours, meetings could not be held a certain time in the lunch hours or after certain hours. So they kind of created, these are hours that we want meetings to be held, and outside of that, where you work and when you work. is flexible, and it created some structure for a hybrid model. One company during COVID, they actually had one day where people were finding that just the meetings, on Zoom, spending all this time on Zoom. And so they picked a day and they said, no one is allowed to set up meetings on this day. So everyone knew they had a day to work, you know? And I think even as we've come back from COVID, the meeting culture is quite strong and people still have that issue. So the flex isn't just where you work, what times you work, it's what's the work you want people doing. This is where, if you have employee engagement, solicit the ideas from your employees, understand where the pain points are, where are the challenges, so then you can find the opportunities.
That's great. And some really great perspectives on a flex environment. Like, I think even more than talking about hybrid, we're talking about flexible working conditions, and they need to work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I was one of the boards I was on, the meetings always started at 8. And for the parents who had to drop off their children to school, we couldn't make that, you had to make alternative arrangements. And we had a new chairman and he asked for feedback, and there was a very simple change. Can we start at 8:30? And immediately from doing that, they were, it created for like a handful of directors. It's like, okay, now I don't have such a panic in the morning. I don't need to find someone else. And I'm there and I'm present and I'm engaged. Really simple solutions sometimes are the answers, but you have to ask. Going back to leadership, you're not the one with the answers. You're the one with the questions. So don't presume by demanding people come back to work, or saying, oh, we'll have flex time this way, it's going to work for everyone. Seek the feedback, ask the questions.
And it's really interesting what a big difference a half hour can make.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So everything that you've offered so far has been amazing, and we're reaching the end of our call here together. So I'm wondering if there's any last things that you would like to say about healthy workplace culture, or any last bits of workplace culture wisdom you might want to offer here.
I think for leaders, I think it's pay attention to it. It's just as important as every financial goal you have. And I do believe it is that secret sauce that can propel a company. And then I think, again, people look to leadership to do culture, but everybody has a role in it. And that's why you see subcultures within companies. So middle management or even influencers. There's always that one person in the office who is always the one organizing, the charitable events or the fun days or the happy hours or whatever. So I think in your own role, look at who's paying attention to this and what's my role in it. So it's not just an issue for leadership. I think anybody who works in a company has a role to play in developing the culture. And are you contributing to it or are you not?
I'm really looking forward to when this video gets posted and we see what really good, clear takeaways people take about the role of leadership in ensuring that there's a healthy workplace culture. So thank you, Michelle, so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kathy. It was great chatting with you.
Go to worldviewprograms.com to learn more about our Healthy Workplace Culture Program options.